The moment I stepped through the doors of Ashford Hall, I understood what it meant to be invisible and conspicuous at the same time. 200 candles burned in the chandeliers above me. Silk rustled against marble. Diamonds caught the light and threw it back in splinters across the painted ceiling. And every woman in that ballroom wore the current fashion. High waists, delicate muslin, pale colours threaded with silver. I wore my mother's dress. It was 12 years out of date. The waist sat at my natural waist, not beneath my bust. The sleeves were wrong. The embroidery along the bodice, tiny silver thistles worked into cream silk, belonged to a decade no one in this room remembered fondly. I had taken it out of the cedar chest 3 nights before. I had brushed the dust from it with trembling hands. I had stitched the hem where moths had feasted, and I had told myself I did not care what anyone thought. I cared. God help me, I cared. I stood at the threshold, and I watched the crowd turn its head and then turn away. Not one cut direct, not one word spoken aloud, just the soft, practiced dismissal of people who had decided I did not exist. My aunt's hand tightened on my elbow. "Eleanor, for heaven's sake, stand up straight. You promised me you would not shame us." "I promised I would attend," I said. "Nothing more." "Then attend and be silent, and for the love of all that is holy, do not dance." I nodded. I had no intention of dancing. I had come to this ball for one reason only, because my aunt had told me that if I did not make a respectable match by the end of the season, I would be sent to a cousin's household in Yorkshire as a companion to an invalid. I was 23 years old. I had no fortune, no connections, and no father. I had only my mother's dress and the memory of a woman who had loved me enough to die of a fever rather than leave me. I took 3 steps into the room, and that was when I felt it. A stare, heavy as a hand on the back of my neck. I turned, because one cannot feel a thing like that and not turn. And across the length of the ballroom, past the dancers and the musicians and the rows of dowagers in their turbans, a man was looking at me. Not glancing, not assessing. Looking. The way a man looks at something he has been searching for his entire adult life, and has only now, at this late and improbable hour, found. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in the severe black and white of evening wear, with a single sapphire at his throat. I did not know him. I was certain I had never seen him before. And yet he was crossing the room toward me, as though the crowd did not exist. My aunt saw him coming and her face went white. "Eleanor," she whispered. "Eleanor, that is the Duke of Ashford. He does not speak to..." But he was already there. He stopped 3 feet from me. He did not bow. He did not speak. He simply looked at me and at the dress, and his jaw worked as though he were trying to swallow something that would not go down. "Madam," he said. His voice was low and steady, and entirely wrong for the expression on his face. "Would you do me the honour of the next dance?" The room went silent. I do not mean that figuratively. I mean that the musicians had just finished a set, and in the pause between dances, every conversation in that ballroom had stopped to listen. 200 faces turned toward us. 200 pairs of eyes. I opened my mouth. I did not know what I intended to say. "Your Grace, I must tell you, I am not. I know precisely who you are," he said. "Will you dance with me?" And before I could answer, before my aunt could faint, before anyone in that ballroom could recover from the shock of watching the Duke of Ashford single out the shabbiest girl in the room and ask her to dance, he held out his hand. I took it. God help me, I took it. But before I tell you what happened on that dance floor, before I tell you what the Duke said when the music began, or why his hand shook when it closed around mine, or what my mother's dress had to do with a 12-year-old secret that would, before the night was out, tear the foundation of English society open like paper. I need to tell you how I came to be in that ballroom at all, because the story does not begin with the Duke. The story begins 3 weeks earlier, with a letter my aunt did not want me to read. My name is Eleanor Hastings. My father was a country clergyman. He died when I was 11, and my mother followed him 8 years later, carried off by a fever that swept through our parish one wet November. I was 19 when she died. I had no inheritance. I had only the cottage, which belonged to the living and passed to the next curate, and the clothes in my chest, and a small locket on a silver chain that my mother had given me the week before she died. I went to live with my aunt, Mrs. Margaret Combe, in her narrow house in Bath. She was my father's sister. She had married a solicitor of modest means, and she had 3 daughters of her own, all of whom required dowries and dancing lessons and new gloves every season. I was an unwelcome addition. For 4 years I had earned my keep. I tutored my cousins in French. I copied letters for my uncle. I mended, and I darned, and I kept my head down, and I did not complain. And in the spring of my 23rd year, my aunt informed me that my time in her house was nearly up. "Your uncle's cousin in Yorkshire has agreed to take you as a companion," she said over breakfast one morning. "Mrs. Whitford. She is a semi-invalid. You will read to her and write her letters and live quietly. It is a good situation, Eleanor, better than you have any right to expect." I set down my cup. "And if I do not wish to go to Yorkshire?" "Then find a husband by midsummer," she said, and smiled a thin smile. "You have the season. You have my charity, for whatever it is worth. If you cannot secure an offer in 3 months, you will go to Mrs. Whitford and be grateful." 3 months. I had 3 months to achieve what 4 previous seasons in Bath had not achieved. I had 3 months, and no dowry, and no connections, and a wardrobe composed of my cousin's cast-offs. I went upstairs. I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I took out my mother's dress. I had not worn it. I had not dared. It was too fine, cream silk, hand-embroidered, with real pearls sewn into the bodice. And it was too old. But as I held it up to the light from my window, I thought, I have nothing else, and she would want me to fight. That was the first day. On the second day, the letter came. It was delivered to the kitchen door by a boy in livery I did not recognize. He asked for Miss Eleanor Hastings, and when I came down, he pressed a sealed envelope into my hand and was gone before I could ask who had sent him. The seal was black wax. The handwriting was unfamiliar. "Miss Hastings, you do not know me. I was a friend of your mother's many years ago, before her marriage. I have recently learned of her death and of your circumstances. I am hosting a ball at Ashford Hall on the 18th of this month. An invitation has been sent to your aunt's household in your name. I urge you to attend. I urge you, further, to wear the cream silk gown your mother left you. Do not ask how I know of it. Only trust that your mother would wish it. A friend." I read the letter 3 times. I read it a 4th. And then I burned it in the grate, because I was certain, absolutely certain, that my aunt would confiscate the invitation if she learned of it. and I wanted no evidence of correspondence with a stranger. The invitation arrived the next morning. My aunt held it at arm's length as though it might bite her. "Ashford Hall," she said. "Eleanor, the Duke of Ashford does not invite country nobodies to his balls. This must be a clerical error." "Perhaps," I said, "but the invitation is in my name." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at her own daughters, plain, pleasant girls who had received no such invitation, and I watched the calculation move behind her eyes. "You will attend," she said at last. "We will all attend. If there is any chance of your meeting someone suitable, we cannot afford to refuse. But Eleanor," her voice hardened, "you will not embarrass me. You will not speak unless spoken to. And you will wear something appropriate." I did not tell her about the cream silk dress. I did not tell her that I had already decided. "And now that you know how the invitation came, and why I wore what I wore, and what I stood to lose if the evening went wrong, now I can tell you what the Duke said when the music began. Because his first words to me on that dance floor were not what anyone watching would have guessed. His first words to me were a question. And the question was this: "Where did you get that dress?" He said it quietly. His hand was at my waist. His other hand held mine. We had taken our places in the line, and the musicians had begun, and the whole ballroom was still watching us. But his voice was pitched for me alone. "It was my mother's," I said. "Your mother?" he repeated. "Who was your mother?" "Margaret Hastings. She was the wife of a country clergyman. She died 4 years ago." He did not speak for a full measure of the music. We moved through the steps. His face had gone very still. "Margaret Hastings," he said. "And before her marriage?" "I do not know, Your Grace. She never spoke of her family. I understood that there had been a quarrel, that she had married against her people's wishes, but she did not." "Margaret Ellsworth," he said. I missed a step. He caught me smooth as water, and we recovered, and if anyone noticed, they would have thought me merely clumsy. "That name," I said. "How do you know that name?" "Because 12 years ago," he said, and his hand tightened on mine, "I watched that dress walk out of a house in Grosvenor Square, in the arms of a woman who swore she would return it within the week. She did not return it. She did not return at all. Her name was Margaret Ellsworth. She was my cousin, and I have been looking for her, and for the dress, for 12 years. I could not breathe. "You are saying—" "I am saying," he said, "that if the dress you are wearing is the dress I think it is, then you are not Eleanor Hastings, daughter of a country clergyman. You are Eleanor Ellsworth, and you are the only surviving heir to the Ellsworth barony, and the fortune that goes with it, which has sat in Chancery for 12 years, waiting for a claimant who never came." The music swelled. We turned. My mother's dress moved around me like a second skin, and I thought of her thin hands mending the hem by candlelight, of her refusing, in all the years of our genteel poverty, to sell the silk, to sell the pearls, to sell the one thing she had carried out of her old life. And I understood, with a clarity that nearly stopped my heart, that she had kept it from me, that she had always meant me to find my way back. "Your Grace," I whispered, I cannot." Do not faint, he said. Not here. Not in front of them. Smile at me, Miss Hastings. Smile as though I have paid you a pretty compliment. We have another 2 minutes of this dance, and then I will escort you from the floor. And then I will tell you everything. But you must not falter now. Do you understand me? I smiled. I do not know how. I smiled. Good girl, he said very softly. Your mother would be proud. And here is where the story turns. Because what I have told you so far, the invitation, the dance, the Duke's recognition, all of that was only the beginning. What the Duke told me in the library at Ashford Hall an hour later was a story of deliberate cruelty, of a will suppressed, of a girl driven from her home by a man who stood to inherit everything if she could not be found. And that man, the man who had destroyed my mother's life and tried to destroy mine, was in that ballroom. He was watching us dance, and he had just realized who I was. The library at Ashford Hall was the largest room I had ever been in. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, a fire in a marble hearth, 2 wing chairs drawn up before it, and a small table between them on which a decanter of brandy stood waiting, as though the Duke had known, before the evening began, that he would be bringing a guest here. He closed the door behind us. He did not turn the key. He crossed to the hearth and stood with his back to me for a long moment. And when he spoke, he did not face me. Your mother's name was Margaret Ellsworth, he said. She was the only child of the 7th Baron Ellsworth. She was my mother's niece, which makes us cousins. Second cousins, I suppose, though the degree hardly matters. I knew her when we were children. I was 7 years older. I was the boy she followed about the gardens at Ellsworth Park, and I was the young man who danced with her at her first ball, and I was... He stopped. He turned. His face was carefully composed, but I saw the cost of it. I was very fond of her. When she disappeared, I looked for her. I looked for 4 years. And then my father died, and I inherited, and my attention was required elsewhere, and I let the search go. That is my shame, Miss Hastings. I let it go. She did not disappear, I said. She married my father. She lived in a cottage in Wiltshire for 19 years. She was not hiding. She was simply living. She was hiding, he said. From her cousin. From the man who told her, on the night of her 18th birthday, that if she did not marry him, he would see her disinherited. She refused him. She went to her father, your grandfather, and begged him to intervene. He told her that he would disown her before he allowed her to marry beneath her station, and he informed her that her cousin's proposal was the best offer she would ever receive. She left that night. She took one gown, the gown you are wearing, and she walked to the coaching inn, and she bought a ticket with the coins she had been hoarding from her pin money, and she went to your father, who was then a curate in Hertfordshire. They had met the previous summer. She had loved him even then. And my grandfather died the following year, without having altered his will. His entire estate, the barony, the land, and a fortune of some £60,000, was to pass to his daughter, or to her issue, upon his death. Failing that, it would pass to his nephew, to the man who had driven her out. And because no one could find her, the estate went into Chancery. The nephew, your cousin, Miss Hastings, though I use the word loosely, has been fighting for 12 years to have her declared dead and himself confirmed as heir. The court has thus far declined, for reasons I need not bore you with. But the final hearing is in 6 weeks. He expected to walk away with £60,000 and a title. He will not now, because you exist. And because your mother's dress, which I would know anywhere, has come to this ball. I sat very still. The fire crackled. Somewhere, far away, I could hear the music of the ballroom. "The letter," I said. "The letter that invited me here. Was that you?" "It was me," he said. "3 weeks ago, a man of my acquaintance, a linen draper in Bath, of all things, wrote to me with the strangest tale. He said that a young woman of respectable but modest circumstance had brought a length of cream silk to him for pressing. He said the silk was of a quality he had not seen in 20 years, and that the embroidery, silver thistles, he said, was unmistakable. He had worked for my family as a young man. He had pressed that very gown for my cousin the summer before she disappeared. He wrote to me because he remembered, and because he thought I would want to know." "And you?" I made inquiries. I learned your name. I learned your circumstances. I arranged the invitation, and I hoped, dear God, Miss Hastings, how I hoped that you would have the courage to wear the dress. I could not tell you any of this in a letter. I had to see you. I had to be certain. Because what I'm about to do, if you allow me, will require absolute certainty. It will require proof. And it will require an enemy who does not see us coming." "An enemy?" I said. "Your cousin, Lord Marchwood. He is in the ballroom tonight. He was invited at my particular request. I did not tell him why. I wished to see his face when he saw yours. I closed my eyes. And did you see it?" "I did," the Duke said. "He recognized the dress before he recognized you. And when he recognized you, forgive me, Miss Hastings, for I know this is not pleasant to hear. When he recognized you, I saw murder in his face. We must move quickly." And here is where every instinct I had been raised with, every lesson in meekness, every training in invisibility, failed me. Because I was not a country curate's daughter anymore. I had not been, it seemed, for 12 years. I was Eleanor Ellsworth, and my cousin had destroyed my mother's life to steal what was hers. And he was in the ballroom, and the Duke of Ashford was asking me, with his eyes, whether I had the courage to face him. "What do you need me to do?" I said. The Duke exhaled. I realized belatedly that he had been holding his breath. "Tonight," he said, "nothing. Tonight you will return to the ballroom on my arm. You will stand beside me, and you will smile, and you will allow every person in that room to see that the Duke of Ashford has singled you out for particular favour. That alone will protect you from the most immediate forms of retaliation. Lord Marchwood cannot touch you in public. Tomorrow, I will call upon your aunt's house. I will inform her of your identity. I will arrange for you to be removed from her care and placed with my mother, the Dowager Duchess, who is presently at her house in Grosvenor Square and who, I should warn you, has been waiting 12 years for this night. Within a week, we will file the necessary petitions with the Lord Chancellor. Within 6 weeks, if all goes well, the inheritance will be confirmed, and Lord Marchwood will be ruined. And if all does not go well? Then we will fight," he said, "for as long as it takes. You are not alone in this, Miss Hastings. You will never be alone in this again. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the lines of tiredness around his eyes, at the way his hands were clasped too tightly behind his back, at the careful, dreadful restraint in his voice. And I understood, for the first time, that this was not simply a matter of justice for him, that the young woman who had walked out of his cousin's house 12 years ago in a cream silk gown had been loved, and that the man standing in front of me had been looking for her, not because she was an heiress, but because he had never forgiven himself for letting her go. "Your Grace," I said, "may I ask you one thing?" "Anything." "Did you love her?" He did not answer at once. He turned back to the fire. He stared into it for so long that I thought he might not answer at all. "I was 19, he said at last. She was 12. I loved her the way an older brother loves a clever little sister. When I was 25 and she was 18, and she was the most luminous thing in London that season. Yes, I loved her. I did not say so. I was not certain she returned the feeling. I was to be married to another woman by my father's arrangement, and I believed I was honour bound, and He stopped. I was a coward, Miss Hastings. I let my father's plans stand. I said nothing. And then she disappeared, and I understood what I had lost. And I never married. I have been alone for 12 years, and I will be alone for the rest of my life. And I tell you this not because I wish to burden you with it, but because you asked, and because you deserve to know that your mother was loved by more than your father. She was loved by everyone who knew her. She was remarkable. And you," he turned, "are so very like her that when you walked through those doors tonight, I nearly wept. I did weep. I could not help it." Silently, without sound, while the fire burned between us, he crossed the room. He took a handkerchief from his coat. He pressed it into my hand, and his fingers closed briefly around mine. And then he stepped back. "Forgive me," he said. "I did not mean to." "Do not apologize," I said. "Do not ever apologize for loving her." He looked at me. Something in his face broke open. "We should return," he said. "They will be wondering." "Yes, in a moment." "Miss Hastings." "Eleanor," I said. "If we are cousins, Your Grace, I think you may call me Eleanor." "Then you must call me Adrian," he said, "when no one is listening. And Eleanor," his voice dropped, "whatever happens in the next 6 weeks, whatever Lord Marchwood attempts, whatever the court decides, I want you to know that you have a home, with my mother, with me. You do not need the inheritance to have a place. You have a place because you are who you are. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Then let us go back." We returned to the ballroom together. The Duke, Adrian, placed my hand on his arm, and he walked me the length of that enormous room, as though I were the crown jewel of the evening, and every head turned, and every whisper rose, and I did not look down once. I looked straight ahead. I smiled at no one in particular. I carried my mother's name, and my mother's dress, and my mother's courage, and I walked through that ballroom as though I had always belonged there. And Lord Marchwood was waiting for me. He intercepted us near the refreshment table. He was a handsome man, I will grant him that, in his middle 40s, with pale hair and a pleasant face that had worn its pleasantness like armour for so long that I could not, at first, see the cruelty beneath. He bowed to the Duke. He turned to me. He smiled. "Ashford," he said, "you must introduce me to your charming companion." Lord Marchwood, the Duke said evenly. Miss Eleanor Hastings. Her mother was Margaret Ellsworth. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. To me, it felt like 20. Lord Marchwood's face did not change. His eyes did. I saw, for a single instant, exactly what the Duke had described. The flicker of calculation, of fury, of a man realizing that 12 years of plotting had just collapsed in front of him. And then the mask slid back into place, and he smiled more broadly. "How extraordinary," he said. "My dear cousin, what a pleasure! What an utter, utter pleasure. I had no idea that Margaret that there was—" He shook his head, as though overcome. "You must forgive me. I am quite undone. Family, you know. Family is everything." "Indeed it is," I said. I met his eyes. I did not look away. "I have heard a great deal about you, my lord. Only good, I hope. Only the truth." He laughed. It was not a pleasant sound, though he arranged it pleasantly. "The truth is so rarely good, is it not? My cousin, may I call you cousin? You must call upon me. Tomorrow, perhaps. We have so much to discuss. The estate, the family, so very much." "Miss Hastings," the Duke said, "will be residing with my mother in Grosvenor Square from tomorrow morning. Any correspondence may be directed there, through her solicitor." Lord Marchwood's smile tightened by exactly 1 degree. "Of course," he said. "Of course. I would not dream of— Well, welcome to London, cousin. I am sure we shall be seeing a great deal of each other." He bowed. He withdrew. And the Duke's hand closed, very briefly, very tightly, over mine. "He will try something," he murmured. "Tonight. Perhaps tomorrow. He is too desperate not to. Stay close to me, Eleanor. Do not leave this ballroom without me." "I will not," I said. And I did not. But here is what Lord Marchwood did, because a man who has spent 12 years plotting does not surrender quietly. Within 3 days of the ball, a rumour began to circulate in London. A rumour so vile, so precisely calibrated to destroy me, that it nearly worked. He had found a witness. He had paid a witness. And the witness was prepared to swear, under oath, that my mother had not been married to my father at all, that I was a bastard, that the cream silk dress was stolen, that I was an impostor, trained by the Duke to play the role of a lost heiress for his own purposes. And the worst of it, the very worst of it, was that the witness was someone I had known all my life. Mrs. Henrietta Pettigrew had been the housekeeper at my father's parsonage for 21 years. She had known my mother. She had known me from birth. She had baked bread in our kitchen and wept at my father's funeral, and written to me twice a year with news of the parish after my mother's death. She was, I had believed, one of the few people in the world who had loved me without condition. She was, it transpired, also a woman of 63, with a niece in service who had recently been dismissed from a great house in London, and a small cottage she could not afford to repair, and a nephew in prison for debt. Lord Marchwood had found her within a week of the ball. He had paid her, or threatened her, or both. And on the 14th of June, 4 weeks and 2 days after the ball at Ashford Hall, Mrs. Pettigrew presented herself at the Lord Chancellor's chambers and swore, before a magistrate, that she had been present at my birth, and that my mother had not been married at the time. The Duke brought the news to me himself. He found me in the Dowager Duchess's morning room, where I had been reading aloud to her from a book of sermons. a habit we had developed in the 3 weeks I had lived under her roof, and which she said she enjoyed, though I suspected she enjoyed my company more than the sermons. He walked in without knocking. He saw my face, and he looked at his mother, and his mother set down her needlework and said, without preamble, "How bad, Adrian?" "Bad," the Duke said. "Marchwood has produced a witness, Mrs. Pettigrew." I dropped the book.
"Pettigrew?" I said. "Our Mrs. Pettigrew? That cannot be. Adrian, there must be some mistake."
"There is no mistake," he said gently. "She has sworn out a deposition. She claims your mother was never lawfully married. She claims she was present at your birth and that no husband attended. She claims the marriage certificate your mother preserved is a forgery." "It is not a forgery," I said. "I have seen it. I have held it. It is written in my father's hand and signed by the rector of—" "I know, Eleanor. I believe you. But the court does not know you. The court will see a woman of no standing making an extraordinary claim, and a respectable housekeeper of 20 years' service contradicting her. Without a counter-witness, we are in difficulty." The Dowager Duchess stood up. She was a small woman and thin, and she moved with the stiffness of her 70 years. But her eyes, when she looked at me, were the eyes of a general surveying a battlefield.
"Then we shall find a counter-witness," she said.
"Eleanor, my dear, think. Who else was present at your birth?"
I do not know. I was—"
"Of course you do not remember your own birth. Think of what you have been told. Who assisted your mother? A midwife? A neighbour? The rector's wife? Someone. There is always someone." I closed my eyes. I thought. I thought of every story my mother had ever told me about the cottage, about the village, about the weeks surrounding my birth.
I thought of Mrs. Dyson, I said.
The midwife. She attended my mother. She is mentioned in the parish register. And there was a Dr. Halliwell in the next village over. He was called when my mother's labour was difficult. He signed something. I remember my father saying he had signed something. "Good," the Dowager Duchess said. "Adrian, you will send a man to Wiltshire tonight. Tonight, do you understand? He will find Mrs. Dyson. He will find Dr. Halliwell if he is still living. He will find the parish register, and he will bring back everything. If Dr. Halliwell is dead, he will find his son, or his records, or his apprentice. I do not care what it costs. Do you understand me?" "I understand, Mother." "And Eleanor," she turned to me, "you will not weep. You will not despair. You will sit here, in this room, and you will continue reading me that very dull book. And when your cousin Marchwood is unmasked as the liar he is,
you will walk into that courtroom with your head high, and you will remember that your mother did not run from him, and neither will you. Am I understood?"
"Yes, Your Grace."
"Very good. Adrian, go." He went.
8 days later, the Duke's man returned from Wiltshire. He had found Mrs. Dyson, 81 years old, half-blind, sharp as a blade. He had found Dr. Halliwell's son, now the physician in his father's place, who produced his father's journals from a trunk in the attic. And he had found something more, something no one had anticipated, something that turned the case from a question of legitimacy into a matter of criminal conspiracy. Because Dr. Halliwell, on the night of my birth, had recorded more than just the delivery. He had recorded a visit, 3 weeks prior, from a gentleman who had offered him a significant sum of money in exchange for certifying, falsely, that my mother had miscarried. The gentleman had not given his name, but Dr.
Halliwell had described him in some detail. Fair-haired, pale-eyed, a small scar above the left brow. And Dr. Halliwell, who had been an honest man, had refused the bribe and recorded the encounter, word for word, in his private journal. The man's description matched Lord Marchwood exactly. The hearing took place on the 14th of July in a panelled courtroom in Westminster. I wore a new gown, pale blue silk, current fashion, commissioned by the Dowager Duchess. But beneath it, pinned inside the bodice where no one could see, was a small square of cream silk I had cut from my mother's dress. A talisman, a reminder. Lord Marchwood's counsel presented Mrs. Pettigrew's deposition. He presented it with great dignity and some feeling, and I watched the magistrates' faces, and I saw how convincing a 63-year-old housekeeper in a black bonnet could be when she wept, and when she swore she had known me from a baby, and when she said she had come forward only because the truth mattered more than her affection for the child she had raised. Our counsel rose. He did not, at first, produce Mrs. Dyson. He did not produce Dr. Halliwell's son. He produced, instead, a single leather-bound journal, and he asked the court's permission to read from it. The permission was granted. He read Dr. Halliwell's entry for the 7th of April, 3 weeks before my birth, in which the doctor recorded, in plain, unadorned prose, the visit of a fair-haired gentleman with a pale gaze and a small scar above his left brow, who had offered him £50 to certify a miscarriage that had not occurred. The courtroom went silent. Our counsel then asked Lord Marchwood to stand. He stood. Our counsel asked him whether he would consent to the removal of his hat. He removed his hat. Our counsel asked the court to note, for the record, the small scar above his lordship's left brow. The court so noted. Mrs. Pettigrew's deposition after that carried very little weight. The magistrates conferred for less than an hour. They returned. They confirmed my claim to the Ellsworth estate and barony. They referred the matter of Dr. Halliwell's testimony, and the evident conspiracy it implied, to the criminal courts. Lord Marchwood was arrested within the week. But I have not told you the most important thing. I have not told you about the moment I walked out of that courtroom, and down the marble steps, and into the July afternoon, and found the Duke of Ashford waiting for me at the foot of the stairs. He stood alone. He had not been permitted in the courtroom during the proceedings. He had been called as a witness and was required to wait outside. And he had been waiting, I later learned, for nearly 6 hours. His cravat was crumpled. He had been running his hand through his hair, the way he did when he was anxious, and it stood up in uncharacteristic disarray. I came down the steps slowly. The Dowager Duchess was behind me, on her son's arm, but she had seen him from the top of the stairs and had murmured something to her footman and turned aside to speak with our counsel. I walked the last 20 feet alone. He looked up. "Well?" he said. His voice was hoarse. "Confirmed," I said. He closed his eyes. For one long moment, he did not speak. Then he opened them, and he looked at me, really looked at me, and I understood that every careful restraint he had maintained over the past 6 weeks, every brotherly attentiveness, every scrupulous propriety, had been costing him something I had not fully appreciated. "Eleanor," he said. "Adrian, would you permit me to—" "Yes," I said. "Whatever it is, yes." He took my hand. He did not kiss it. He simply held it. There,
on the steps of the courthouse, in full view of God and London, and the small crowd of gawkers who had gathered to see the end of the Ellsworth scandal.
And he said, very quietly, "When this is all done, when the estate is settled, and the criminal matter is resolved, and you have had time to be yourself without a shadow over you, may I ask you something? Not now, not for months, perhaps, but when the time is right, may I ask you something?" "Adrian," I said, "you may ask me now." "No," he said. "No, I will not ask you now. You have been an heiress for 1 hour. You have had 3 weeks of being an Ellsworth, and 6 weeks of being anything other than my ward and my mother's companion. And I will not, I refuse to, ask you anything that might feel like obligation. I want you to have time, months, a season, longer if you need it. I want you to know, without the slightest doubt, that whatever answer you give me, you gave it freely." "Adrian, when the time is right," he said, "not before." I looked at him. I thought about what my mother had done, about the girl who had walked out of a house in Grosvenor Square at 18 years old, with nothing but a silk dress and the conviction that she knew her own heart. I thought about the man in front of me, who had waited 12 years for a woman he had been too honor-bound to claim. "Adrian," I said, "I do not require a season. I have had 4 of them, and they were all perfectly dreadful. But if you wish me to wait, I will wait. And when you ask me, whenever you ask me, you already know my answer." He laughed. It was the first time I had ever heard him laugh. It was an extraordinary sound, deep and surprised, as though he had forgotten how. "Eleanor Ellsworth," he said, "you are your mother's daughter." "I am my own," I said. "Yes," he said. "Yes, you are." We were married in the spring. Not that spring, the following one, because the Dowager Duchess insisted on a proper mourning period for my mother, whom I had never been permitted, as a country curate's daughter, to mourn publicly, and whom I now honoured with a full year of half-mourning in a house that had loved her. We were married in the chapel at Ashford Hall, on the first warm day of April, with the Dowager Duchess weeping openly in the front pew, and my aunt, who had forgiven me nothing and been forgiven everything, seated 2 rows behind her with an expression of stunned disbelief that I suspect remained on her face for the rest of her life. I wore a new dress, white silk embroidered with silver, not thistles this time, but lilies of the valley, which had been my mother's flower. But pinned inside the bodice, where no one could see, was the same small square of cream silk I had carried into the courtroom 9 months before. My mother with me. My mother, always, with me. Lord Marchwood was convicted of conspiracy and perjury. He was sentenced to 14 years' transportation to New South Wales. He did not survive the voyage. I will not pretend to have grieved him. Mrs. Pettigrew, who had repented her testimony before the trial concluded, was not prosecuted. She wrote to me, once, a long rambling letter of self-justification and apology, which I read and burned and did not answer. And the cream silk dress, my mother's dress, the dress that had walked out of Grosvenor Square 12 years before my birth and walked back into Ashford Hall 23 years later on my shoulders, was folded, after my wedding, back into its cedar chest. My daughter wore it, 30 years later, to her own presentation at court. My granddaughter wore it after her. It hangs now in a glass case in the East Gallery at Ashford Hall, with a small brass plaque that reads, in my husband's writing,
Margaret Ellsworth's dress, returned by her daughter, June 1816.
I pass it every day on my way to the library.
I touch the glass. I think of her. And I remember, always, that the evening I walked into Ashford Hall with my head held as high as I could manage, knowing I was out of fashion and out of place and out of hope. A man across a crowded ballroom looked at me and did not see a shabby girl in an old dress. He saw my mother coming home. And that, in the end, was everything.